Okay, so this class is specifically going to be about structuring, like how to approach a sketch and all the stages. Um, so what that means is we're just going to practice one approach, right? This is not like the approach or how you do it. It's just how I tend to approach sketching, especially when I'm outside and maybe don't have a lot of time because the light is changing or I'm not going to be there for a prolonged period of time. So I'm just going to give you sort of the steps the way in which I approach a more or less finished sketch in a short period of time and how I think about it and go about it. So I thought that this could be helpful, especially as a last class. So as a way to hopefully encourage you to sketch more. And sometimes, especially when you're outside, you can feel a little bit overwhelmed by how much there is to take in. So sort of how you can focus in on something and, sort of flush out an idea in a relatively short amount of time. Okay, so I actually even prepared a step-by-step thing of the sketch that I did. A place that I love in Rome, it's a monastery in the neighborhood Trastevere, which is just across the river from the center. I thought it would be a nice image to work with today. I also chose it because it's slightly complicated. So it's really nice to work with complicated situations because that's reality. Rarely are things simplified for us. So we'll take something complicated and learn to simplify it. Somebody says my video is freezing. I'm going to turn it off real quick and see if that helps. Thanks for letting me know. Let's see. Okay. So, okay, is that better? Just let me know if you cannot see or hear. Sorry about technical difficulties. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit first and tell you about my process of approaching a sketch and the different steps that I go through. I'll share my screen and some images, some quick sort of step-by-step how I developed a sketch. I just photographed it in progress. And then we'll do it ourselves. So I'm going to share my screen, which means I won't be able to see the chat box. So if my video is freezing or you can't hear me, please just speak up. Unmute yourself and let me know. So this is the image that I worked with. I love this place. I think it's beautiful and serene in the heart of what can sometimes be a chaotic city. So I chose this and I just approached it step by step. I'll tell you. So what I did is I decided I like this vertical composition, right? That the photograph is taken vertically, but that doesn't mean I have to make a vertical sketch, right? You could make, I could have zoomed in and chosen a horizontal composition just as easily. But I just chose to work with the composition that was there. So what I did is first I drew an outside frame, right? Like delineating where, the lines of where I'm going to be working inside of. And the first thing I do is I use light, sketchy lines to sort of think about the big shapes or like the main idea. So I just put in this, I thought this triangle that's in the foreground, it's actually a really great composition device for like leading the eye in. So I just went ahead and put that in my sketch. And then I just sort of blocked in, I'm sort of, you see how I'm moving my line around because it's like, oh, I probably drew one and thought, oh, that's not right. Maybe it's a little bit lower. the umbrella, and just some outlines of the trees. Like, this is how I start a sketch. Just the big shapes. And I'm not committed to anything yet. I'm sort of searching out, you know, is this going to work? Is this a good idea? So, oops. So the next image is I start filling it in a little bit. Now, but I'm still keeping it pretty sketchy. And you see how I'm, you know, moving lines around. This is here, no, it's here. Is this here? No, it's here, right? I'm sort of moving things around. I'm not committed to anything. And now I'm sort of emphasizing this diagonal ground line to lead you in. Then I've decided, okay, that's really important, actually. I want that to be there, and I think that's a good spot for it. So then, you know, I've just marked where the trees are and the big shapes, like the overall lines. Then I start to fill it in a little bit. Now I start to commit to the idea and to really place things. Even though it's still messy, that's fine. You know, and now I've also started to not follow the photograph. Now I'm following my drawing, meaning maybe these arches aren't exactly like what's really there, or, you know, I start to move things around, and I took out all this information. There's a lot actually happening in the image, and I just took it all out. I wanted my drawing to be simple. The thing is, I can always add things later, but they're not what's important in the drawing. What's important is the main idea. It's like, this is leading you in here, and I know that there's a shadow here, and this is going to be light. So I think this area is probably going to be my focal point or area of interest because it has such high contrast. Then I add shading, and it's almost done, basically, right? So from this point, I added in shading. I'm not adding any details. You know, I filled in the arches, added the main areas of light and shadow. And then I just finish it up by emphasizing some lines, right, in the shadow, making a little bit more specific outlines. Where it's really dark, I put in some darks. But for me, this is a finished sketch. So at this point, if you want to, right, I could have gone and added details here. Maybe I should, because this is a big sort of blank area. But for me, it was finished enough. Okay. So this is sort of the main idea and what we're going to do today. It's really important that to keep in mind, like, we don't need to make a photograph, meaning we don't need to copy every detail of what's in front of us. At some point, our drawing lives on its own, right? And so it has a life of its own, and it doesn't exist in relationship to the thing you're drawing it from. It exists on its own. So we're just going to work sort of step by step in creating your own sketch from this image, which is at San Cosimato in Trastevere. I mean, I have some notes here that I want to make sure and cover everything. I mean, it's really important to experiment, right, and try different ways of working, because the main point of doing all of this is you find something that makes sense to you. So you can try this approach, and, you know, maybe some things will make sense and some things won't, but, you know, just try it and see. Throw away anything that doesn't work for you. It's important, I think, to, at the beginning, keep it sort of loose and sketchy. That way it's easy to move your lines around. If you start with really heavy, dark lines, you're less willing to move things around and change them. So I think it helps a lot to start pretty loosely and then sort of firm it up and commit as you go. It's also, I think this approach works for me because I don't get stuck on the details. The details are the things that come at the very, very end. So I really look for the biggest shapes, you know, like the biggest overall shape, say, of the building, or there was an umbrella, or the trees, just the whole sort of looking at them as shapes rather than things. And definitely not looking at the, the details until a later stage. Okay, so we're going to do this together, step by step, and we'll just take a few minutes, and you can tell me you need more time or you're ready to move on in each step. So, any comments, questions, anything before we start? Okay. So I'm going to share the image again that we're going to work from. And what we'll do is start by deciding on our composition. Now, one thing, especially when you're outdoors, is it can be hard to sort of hone in and decide what I'm going to draw exactly. Like, where am I going to delineate? So one thing that can be really helpful is even just using your hands like a viewfinder, right? And looking through them. The closer to your face or eye, the more you see, like the wider the frame. And I close one eye. And then you can kind of zoom in, right? The further away you move, you can zoom in. You can also use like cut out piece of paper, with just a hole in it, and hold that up. That way it will block off, everything else. You won't be able to see it. So you kind of want to form an idea in your mind about what's going to be your composition or what's going to be inside your frame. So the first step we'll do is just looking at the image and deciding what's going to be your frame. What are you going to draw? Now, you could totally zoom in, even though I'm going to leave the whole image up. So it might be hard to see finer details, but you could decide to just zoom in on something like this. There's even a figure sitting on a bench here, right? Or you could just take a slice, a vertical slice, a horizontal slice. You can draw the whole thing. Or you could draw the whole thing except for this left side. That's completely up to you. So what I'd say is the first step, we'll just take maybe 4 minutes and decide on what's going to be your composition. Is it going to be vertical, horizontal? And on your paper, draw the frame that you're going to work inside of. Now, it can be big or small, right? If the smaller it is, the less detail you will be able to fill in. But don't make it tiny, right? Even maybe like half a sheet, a quarter of a sheet of printing paper. So let's just start there. I'm going to set the timer for just 4 minutes, and let's find our composition. Okay. So try and just get in the major lines and the big shapes that you want to include. Don't worry about shading or details yet. I have about just over a minute left. Okay, and stop. Okay, so how did that go? Does anybody have any questions? Are you able to do it? Are you like, there's too much information? Sorry, I dropped it.
I started with a very horizontal composition. This is Donna, because I really liked those rooftops. And then when I got to the bottom of the composition, I realized I really had to make it up because there was, so I haven't figured that one out yet. At the bottom, there was, it didn't make sense. It wasn't grounded. So I think I have to extend the drawing.
Okay, good. Yeah, so that's perfect. Because one thing is this frame, yeah, let's see. Let me, I'm going to put you on the big screen. Okay, can you move it a little bit to your left? Okay, great. Yeah, so you can always extend your frame, right? You can move your frame around as well. Yeah, so what would you include if you were to make it lower? What would you put in that's not in there?
Well, I started to extend the frame this way. Sorry, I've got a piece of cardboard with paper on it, not ready today. So then I had to totally make it up because I was still on the second story of the building and it had nothing holding it down. So I haven't figured that one out yet.
Okay. Okay, well, maybe like the tops of the arches might give it something to hold on to. That's something you could experiment with.
I'll try that when you have the photo up again.
Okay, good. Thanks, Donna.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else that would like to share or comment? Okay. Okay, so why don't we go to the next stage? And yeah, the next stage is we're going to start work on our composition a little bit more. Here's mine. So I really decided like, okay, I like these lead-in lines. You know, these are the big shapes. And I started to commit to where things actually are or are going to be, right? You can see I like move things. Now that's going there. I move whatever. I started move this line here. So we'll just take another like 4 minutes. And this time we'll start to commit and sort of fill in, but still staying in the main idea, the big shapes. But this time we're committing to where things are going to be, right? And no details, but you know, the bigger shapes. So is the umbrella there in mine, right? And where is it? You know, where are the roof lines? this kind of thing. Okay. Okay, so let's do another 4 minutes and see if that's enough time. I think so. Okay, start. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay. Okay. So how did it go? Okay. Any questions, comments? Okay. So let's move on to the next step now. So the next step is going to be, now we're going to start to fill in more of the smaller shapes inside the bigger shapes. So I'm not talking about drawing leaves on trees yet or at all. Right now I'm talking about, let's see, we'll look at the examples to have concrete examples. So now I really started to commit to where everything is and fill in. Right before, I have these bigger details of, okay, the lines of the buildings are here. Now it's like making the roof lines. Here I made the arches, the smaller arches. I delineated sort of like where some of the shadows are going to go, right? Here I made this wall a little bit more solid and concrete. So we'll do this step again in 4 minutes, and then from there, next will be like shading, really, anything that's going to start to make it concrete. So maybe why don't we do these next 2 steps together, and we'll spend a few more minutes. So now it's starting to add more information, or like if I had just drawn, this whole shape before, now it's like, okay, maybe I put in the windows, or now I, sort of fix it. I hone in on the big shapes and sort of add smaller shapes to the larger shapes, right? So now I'm sort of getting everything where it is. And then in my case, I added shadows, right? I started filling them in, and they don't have to be dark at this point. You can darken them at the very end, right? But I started putting in more detail, and I'd say at this point, if you're going to shade or add shadow, we'll do that now. So we'll take 5 minutes and keep continuing to the next step. More detail, and if you're going to add shadow, put in the shadows now. Okay, just one more minute. Okay, and stop for now. Okay, how's it going? We're just going to have one more session of a few minutes to finish up and sort of add any details or really dark sort of, that's the last part. So does anybody have questions or comments or anything they want to share before we go to the last stage? Okay, so let's just spend 5 more minutes, maybe how about 4? I don't know if we need 5. And in my drawing, so this is my sketch where it was at this point. Like, right, I had added the shadows and sort of, it's all sort of there, the idea. And this was the last stage. So one thing that's to keep in mind about shadows is something called unifying them, which means, not leaving a lot of blank little skippy spaces, right? Even though mine are very rough, right? They're by no means finished. Just sort of, a nice even line. And so something about the eaves of these, under the eaves of these roofs, they're really dark at first, and then they get a little bit lighter, right? Because they're not receiving as much light as they are when they get down here. So any kind of thing about, details of maybe Donna said she really liked the top of these rooftops, this is the time to put in any of those details, sort of the edge of the foliage of the trees, to anything like that. That's the last step. So we'll take 5 minutes and finish up, and then I'd love to see some of your sketches, have some sharing. Okay, so we have 5 minutes to finish up. Excuse me. Okay, just about one more minute. Okay. Okay, and stop. So, did everyone have plenty of time? Did you have too much time? Not enough time? Okay, does anybody want to share their drawing, ask questions, comment? It would be helpful for me to know, was this useful? Sort of, did this process make sense to you, or did you have trouble with it? Did it not make sense?
It made sense to me. This is Donna, but I completely messed up. I mean, I started that top horizontal composition, which I loved. It wasn't grounded, so I tried adding the whole bottom of it. And I kept going back and forth. I'd cover up bottom half of the drawing and work on the top. I think it's in my mind 2 drawings. And I like the top horizontal best. I just need to focus on it and admit it that it's not going to be grounded. It's going to be a rough period.
Yeah, one thing you can do is, this is really great, because one thing, like you're experimenting, you can, sorry, let me grab paper, is right, you can always, with a, like a blank piece of paper, you can always sort of, you know, try covering up parts of it, or, you know, and see if maybe you can find an interesting composition inside your drawing and you can just crop it. And you could always
That's exactly
develop
what I
that a
did with
little
the piece
more.
of paper.
Great, yeah. And you know what? Not all drawings work out. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's totally fine. Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing. Jan, do you want to share? Oh, hold on. You're muted. Let me unmute you.
Unmute. Okay. I really need a lesson on trees. I was over, I don't know, anyway, it is what it is, but I wanted to put some roofs in there, but then I needed a bigger piece of paper.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you can always like tape paper and keep going, right? Like tape those pieces. But yeah, actually, one thing is, I mean, because I have it on my screen, you could even try, you know, cropping it after the series of arches that are to the left of the umbrella, or even try cropping it on the other side, like just like you don't have to include that whole tree on the right, yeah, or even on the other side, cutting off part of the tree, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'd say experiment a little bit with cropping and see if,
Yeah.
right. Well, and I mean, one thing is, if you want, where it depends where you want the eye to go. So it's nice that
And
the trees don't have a lot of detail, because otherwise you might get distracted looking off.
yeah, the eye here doesn't really know where to
Okay.
go. But
No, it seems to me that you could like tighten it up a little bit, because it does seem like the focal point is where it's really working in charcoal, like really high contrast with the white of the umbrella and those nice shadows below. Marsha said, it made sense for sure in starting. I found it difficult to frame in and then figure out the trees and shading around them. Okay, yeah, I mean, so trees specifically can start to get a little complicated, right? Like human bodies, they're sort of like human bodies. But you can think about trees as masses of light and shadow. I mean, they also are in perspective based on where our eye level is how much we see the underneath or front or sides of them. But if you can do that thing about squinting, you can just treat the trees like with just sort of as a mass, giving them a general sense of light and shadow. Then if you want to develop your drawing to a really high finished level, then you might start to work more with the trees. Oh, and then the shading around them. One thing that can be really helpful is making sort of like, especially in buildings or spaces that go back and sort of recede like here into the shadows, and you can't exactly distinguish what's happening in the shadows. Like we don't see a lot of detail usually in the shadow. So I just want to share quickly, like one thing that can be helpful is, you know, making these shadows sort of relatively flat and even. Here they have more movement because they're trees, right? Trees have more of a sense of movement. But if it's something that's like a building, the shadow behind here, I'd say, you know, just kind of unify it and make it more or less, you know, sort of flat, simple shapes. Is that helpful at all?
Here we go.
Okay, is this Karen or Michael? This is Karen.
This is Karen.
Nice.
I took a lot of liberties, so, you know,
Hey.
but there you have it. The trees reminded me of the illustrations in Madeline, the book Madeline. You know, you have to like little scribbles
Yes.
for trees. And here's Michael's.
Oh, yes. So you had a
Yes.
more zoomed in composition, and Michael had more zoomed out.
Right.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I love the trees coming off, and then the triangle is really pointing in. And then you made this luscious garden, Karen. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Really
put the benches in.
nice.
Michael said,
They
were there
both
benches
work
there?
really well, and they're both very amazing.
Yes, there are
That's
benches.
really cool. Thank you. Yes, there are. Okay, does anyone else like to share?
I will kill it, Mary.
Oh, great. Thanks, Mary.
You see it?
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, we put it down just, there you go. Really nice. So, wow. Everyone completed their drawings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my big aha was I looked at your drawing and I was trying to literally copy the perspective in the photo, and I looked at your drawing and I saw that you had like the roof lines perfectly parallel. And in the drawing, there was a little bit of perspective. Yeah. So I kind of went back and tried to switch it out, which then it made the drawing so much better. So I like the idea you taught us that you can edit photographs. It doesn't have to be literal. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I'm sure but that's a beautiful drawing. And,
thank you.
You know, we're never going to compare it, especially with a horrible cell phone photograph, right? And we didn't spend that much time, right? Maybe 15 minutes. And yeah, it's really nice, really nice. Also, you gave so much depth in your shadows. They have a lot, your drawing has a lot of depth to it. Really nice. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And that's a good point that I completely, yeah, thank you. I completely forgot to say, yes, I changed the perspective in my drawing to make it be head on, because in the photograph, it was taken with the cell phone and there was distortion, right? So I just edited it myself to make it make more sense to me. Okay, would anybody else like to share? Okay, well, that's it. Thank you all so much. I hope that you found these classes helpful, and most of all, I hope that they will inspire you to keep
Picture too.
drawing.
Wait, well, thank you so much, Kelly.
And perfect. Perfect. And